Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Well, hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm so grateful to be here with you tonight. As Susan said, my name is Seth, Anderson-Matz. I use he, him pronouns. One of many roles that I serve at the moment is at First Universalist in the intergenerational, housed under children, youth, and family programs, but doing intergenerational ministry work. I serve a couple roles with a couple other congregations as well. And then I also have this freelance community ministry work where I come and visit congregations as a guest preacher, as a workshop facilitator, and a lot of my work does revolve around queer and trans liberation work, solidarity work, and getting our congregations on the same page about the needs, the emerging and standing needs of queer and trans folks. So very grateful to be here with you to engage in some of that together. And I'd love to start us this evening with a short reading from the poet Andrea Gibson, who's a trans poet who's just recently passed away a couple of months ago. And these words, I think, resonate deeply with this work in particular. So I'll read it aloud for us here. It says, "Lately, I've been thinking about who I want to love and how I want to love and why I want to love the way I want to love and what I need to learn to love that way and who I need to become the kind of love I want. When I break it all down, when I whittle it into a single breath, it essentially comes out like this. Before I die, I want to be somebody's favorite hiding place, the place they can put everything they know they need to survive. Every secret, every solitude, every nervous prayer, and be absolutely certain I will keep it safe. I will keep it safe." I find that this poem, written toward the end of Andrea's life, really helps root us in the values that guide this work for us. Who is it that we want to be in this work? Why do we want to do this work? How does it align with our Unitarian Universalist values and our own personal values in this world that we're all living in? So I hope that these words land softly on your heart. Just a quick overview of our time together. We'll start with some introductions. I'll introduce myself a little more deeply. I'd like to hear who all of you are. We'll do a little pre-flexion just to get a little kind of a pre-test almost of where you kind of perceive yourselves to be in this work already. And then I'll do a little painting the landscape, laying some kind of historical, contextual information on you. And we're going to work through some paradigm shifts. We're going to think about some of the kind of overarching ideologies that we see often in this work and how we can kind of pivot some of these ideas to get a little closer to where we want to be. We'll talk through some different types of welcoming support, and then we'll open back up for reflections, suggestions, questions, and answers. So again, I'm Seth. I told you a little bit about my portfolio as it is now. I move both in Unitarian Universalist circles as well as in some Christian spaces. I was raised Catholic. My ancestors are Catholic as far back as documents can show. My parents met doing Catholic youth retreats in college, so it goes in deep. And I wouldn't say that I identify strongly with that tradition now, but I hold a deep reverence for the spiritual practices and traditions that sort of guided my own formation. I went to seminary. I went to the United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities here. I have a Master of Arts in Religion and Theology. So much of what I also do is trans-theological work, which I think is interwoven into this work and also is sort of its own distinct category of work. Both talking about how our existing theologies reflect trans life and also sort of the fertile theological ground that trans life offers us and the incredible well of wisdom that is reflected in trans life. So that's a lot of what I do. I was born in the Mankato area, so I'm not too far from home, and I still do quite a bit of ministry there. I served a short interim role there as well, so I revisit regularly, including this Sunday. I'll be at a congregation out there preaching. I live in the South Minneapolis area with my wife. We got a couple of dogs, a weird little cat, and we're doing all right. So I'm very grateful to be a member of the trans community who is relatively well settled and not really in as dire of need of these sort of emergency resources, but also well positioned to talk to communities and sort of bridge the gaps, sort of serve as a bridge or a liaison between folks in most severe need and the folks who have the most resources to share. So that's a little bit more about me. I'd love to hear from you if you could share your name, your pronouns, and I'd love to hear what makes you feel welcome in this space. Certainly feel free to take a moment or two to reflect on that before sharing. And whoever feels called to start.
I'll start. I'm Susie McPherson, and what she wrote down, so what makes me feel welcome in a space is eye contact and smiles. I started remembering names, and I always remember faces.
I'll go next. I'm Colleen, and my pronouns are she, her. And I was gonna say, the first thing I thought about was a smile. You know, when somebody gives you a smile, you can just feel warm and welcome. So I'm smiling at all of you.
Going Becky, in addition to the smile and stuff, I like chit chat, just a little chit chat.
Yeah, my name's Ollie Stocker, pronouns he, him, and I agree with the smile and the like, sometimes the handshake is really nice. And then, but inviting tone of voice and, you know, somebody saying, introducing who they are. Hi, I'm Ollie. That's a really helpful kind of thing. It tells me that they're willing to be vulnerable and engage.
My name is Jill Van Kovac. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I would say if somebody says, welcome, come on in, make yourself at home.
Just listen.
It's good.
I can go next. My name is Ida. Pronouns she, her. I was just talking about Thanksgiving, so when I say welcome, it's always food. So,
Absolutely.
I'm Sherry, and my pronouns are she and her. And aside from a lot of the other things that have been said, one of the things that makes me feel welcome is invitation. Join us.
Yeah,
Come over here. Do you want to talk to me? Things like that.
That's right.
I'm Michelle. I use pronouns she, they, and it's kind of a theme, but if I'm in a big group of people, someone will come over to me often, so
I'm Will, he, him, and a welcome is great, but I also like a one-on-one connection in a group, especially if it's unfamiliar. But I also like a sense of non-judgment in the group. Reduced competitiveness, if there's an air of that, it makes me feel.
Thank you.
My name is Whitney Mason. Forward. I use she, her pronouns, and offering starter pronouns are she, her. Thanks, she told me otherwise later. I got a twofer. I'm autistic, and so one thing that makes me feel welcome is being invited, because I need it to be explicit for me to know that I'm supposed to or allowed to be there.
Yeah.
I'm not the kind of person who will ever just kind of like assume I'm included. I love being told that I'm included. It's great. And when I first rolled in community about a year ago, I was having an epic emotional crisis. And one thing that made me feel welcome was the fact that there's Kleenex boxes everywhere. And I felt very anticipated. But right now, that is my volunteer gig. I'm in my second week of coming on Tuesdays and just restocking the Kleenex boxes, because to me, it is such a profound gesture of welcome.
Yes, I love that. Your whole self is welcome in every.
I'm Lisa, she, her. I think being invited and included as well. I'm shy, I tend to hang back, so. Totally, thank you.
I'm Teresa, and they use pronouns she, her, and And what makes me feel welcome is those explicit overtures. In new situations, I'm sure that most people think, and so when people make eye contact or include me in a conversation or any of those things, then I feel like I get my way.
I'm so pronouns are she, her. I would say that something that makes me feel welcome is all this stuff that everyone's saying is so important and so great. And also, there's this piece where sometimes when you meet someone new, they, instead of kind of engaging in conversation, they give you kind of one-word answers. Yeah. Like it's an interview or, you know, so what I really appreciate is someone being willing to like take that step, and sometimes it takes courage to just, you know, say the full sentence, ask a question in return, just keep it going. Yeah, that's being willing to bear some vulnerabilities in the space.
Yeah, I'm Rick McPherson. I use he, him pronouns and feel welcome when people talk to me.
We get everybody? You did. Fabulous. All right. So we're gonna do a little bit of our pre-flexion here. So what I want to ask you to do, and I encourage you to think kind of first to yourself and then in conversation with the folks around you. But on a scale of 1 to 10, generally, how would you rate your own awareness of trans liberation issues locally and globally? I say for these purposes, 1 is I've never even heard of trans people before. 10 is I am a trans person who experiences multiple compounding layers of oppression, right? Compounding layers being racism, classism, sexism, and misogyny, right? That there's multiple iterations. I would say, you know, for my own sake, I would call myself an 8 on this, right? I am a trans person, I'm a queer person, I'm also a white person, I'm also a male identified person, I'm also a homeowner, I'm also a married person, right? So there's many layers of privilege in addition that do indeed limit my scope of understanding even of folks in my own community. So I say that also to invite you to give yourself some grace as you kind of grade yourself here. And then I'd also like you to consider where your congregation at large, like your awareness is around trans issues, trans liberation issues. Thinking about my work with First Universalists, I would say that we're at about a 6, right? With a 1 being we've never once talked about trans issues before in this church. With a 10 being everyone is trans at this church and or has meaningful relationships with many, many trans, right? I would say First Universalist is about a 6. There's a significant trans population there. There's queer and trans folks reflected in the staff and in the ministry teams. Lots of conversations about trans liberation and trans work. It's certainly not a perfect 10 by any means, right? So with all of that in mind, I think we'll start with 5 minutes and see how it feels. It might not be quite enough time. Start with 5 minutes, think a little bit to yourself, and then share maybe with 3 or 4 people around you, see where you can get that. So, have at it.
I'm like 45, and I have fortunate friends and transfer that as breakfast, my used to know somebody as one person. That really made me start listening to yeah, there's 2 separate presents. It is. But we're thinking there's my daughter, English immigrants, so we say, so they got their English, they're speaking now. But at the same time, like, although in general, you trans more impression, less economic.
Yeah, I think
Weirdly, some of my friends are like, some of my friends who are trying to on their position. So I feel like I'm not in touch with language. Just because. Statistically, I have. Friends who are like, yeah, it's very regulating. Like, I didn't know what anybody's here. Just straight. My boss is going back to students. I really like it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That is just straightforward.
Well, I was thinking about some of the house stuff that it means. And I'm looking at this of that.
We are. Because Jen had a very close relationship with the it's kind of.
Now we have
I don't, maybe it's 7, something like that. My oldest, she transferred her daughter, and she's
I know a lot of the friends who I think I'm stuff, kind of.
I've been with things through this process. So feel like I have some.
How do you think about getting these?
I just want to say, very common, you know.
my awareness.
It's like frustrating.
A year.
So. 3 years ago, that was a grant up here. I really figured a bit on this machine. And there was huge change that I.
Yeah.
She used to be on those.
Sounds like conversation, or so gonna go with something that we want to
So is there a speech? We have to have a meeting, there were a lot of people.
Kind of make sure to come back together as we practice the kids.
You're gonna have to like, oh, what's the word?
Yeah. No, I love it. I love that conversation. Let's bring it back together, friends. We'll continue the conversation in the large group here. Yes. I noticing a theme having come from dinner as well, that maybe this is the pattern. This conversation. It's a great pattern to have, right? You can't stop talking to each other. It's a wonderful thing. We'll come back together, we'll continue the conversation in a large group here. And I wanna say, as we're getting going to that, as we're talking about these scales, right, which a scale is by nature a linear number, right? I'm not positioning these numbers as a conquest, right? The goal is not necessarily to reach 10 in these categories, right? Because there's to have the goal be that every member of your congregation is a trans person is not a realistic goal, right? It's not even necessarily a desirable, right? It's mostly just to sort of locate us and sort of figure out what our proximity to this work is, what our proximity to this is, right? So with that in mind, I would love to hear back a little bit of what came from your conversations. Whoever's feeling brave to get started.
I think our group coalesced around the church, we had about 2.
Okay.
And,
Any more?
room to grow on that in every respect, and hopeful sense that it will.
Mm-hmm.
And our individual ratings varied, but nobody was over, I think 5 was the highest anyone got, most of us were on the lower.
Sure. Do you, and feel free to other folks in the group too, can you give me a little bit more context about the 2? What kind of locates you as the 2?
Not having any official, any formal function that I could remember, where there was discussion about transition.
Okay.
Not having a sense of affirmative, there's no signs or anything for somebody to come into the church and see visually right away, this is a welcoming community. There's a little thing on the website, but no one goes to the website.
Sure.
Welcoming community on the website doesn't tell you anything.
Sure.
So we're at the stage where there's a group of people in this room who are trying to move things forward, and there's other people who are interested in, I think, supporting that, so I'm encouraged.
Yeah, wonderful. I hear it makes sense that it would be a 2 and not a 1 also because here we are, right? Here we are doing this together. So it's certainly not that there's been no conversations, but there was at least the conversations to get me heard.
Also, a while back, we had a much larger queer trans population here on membership, and a lot of them have left the last 3-4 years for various understandable reasons.
Sure.
And so we had, for example, a member of the church who was also leading groups, and they have left. So there's very little left.
Yeah.
Let's say it was sort of, yeah, we're leaving this church for various reasons.
Got it.
And so we're hoping that we can turn that around again. And we don't know how soon that will happen because of the signs in the website and stuff like that. We're like worried about that. We don't have enough to show for it.
Sure.
But anyways,
Yeah.
it has changed.
Okay. Awesome.
I could just dovetail that, that during that time, there was a queer, trans, non-binary LGBTQ group that I think had probably about 20 active members, and most of them were members of this church at the time. During that time, we had queer workshops. We had a movement workshop led by a trans man who was a dancer, performer, and a queer seminarian, I guess I'll say, that just led the group, and it was a pretty good sized group for the church. So there was this big movement towards a positive community, and the church seemed to embrace that. There was a divisive issue that happened, and a lot of them were blamed for something, and they were just gone. Almost everything. And the church has not responded to having anything really on the homepage of the website that says we're welcoming, and you're welcome here if you are. And I've been told by many queer folks that that's the first thing they look at if they're going to a church.
Yeah.
If they don't see that on the homepage, then their assumption is that these folks aren't serious about it and move on.
Yeah.
Which is a real loss, I think, for us.
Yeah, I'm hearing that there was a sort of like some kind of event also that sort of created a fissure of trust, right? That and we're sort of experiencing the effects of that. Okay.
I'll say, I just learned 10 minutes ago that there was like a queer aspect to like the event
Sure.
that I was not here for, because I'm doing
Okay.
year two.
Yeah.
But I would have said like 2 to 3, just because there's not a lot of, like, if somebody's embracing meditation, there'll be a nod to like LGBTQ. But like, I don't know, I'm still really bummed out about our end statements and how they don't say anything about gender or sexuality. I'm really bummed out.
Yeah.
And it, I don't know, I'm a woman and I'm queer and just like and I asked about them, someone said, oh, that was under multiculturalism.
Yeah.
And I'm a sociologist by training, so to me, no, it does not.
And that was
Oh, that's, well, and you know,
So that I killed, I'm bummed, and I'm gonna be bummed for 5 years until we do this again. And I'll go the same things, and I'll be like, this time you got to talk about.
that is so interesting. I'm just gonna quick anecdote derail us for a second because some of my earliest organizing work was around safe schools. And something that was really clear in the research, GLISE's organization that I was working with at the time, and the research that we did, it was very clear that bullying policies, particularly, the bullying policies that didn't specifically enumerate sexual orientation and gender identity, essentially might as well not have included, right? And when they were grouped together into sort of, that's under multiculturalism kind of example, right? That youth not only didn't see themselves reflected in that policy, but it wasn't enforced, right? So I just think, words matter, right? They matter a lot, yeah.
I like things to be very explicit and direct.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah, I'm also hearing so many of you earlier say, I experience welcome when there's a direct explicit invitation, right? It seems like a very clear option, right? Okay, great. Other reflections from this?
There are these 2 things mentioned that are happening, which is the hosting of One Voice.
Yeah, I saw their office here, yeah.
Here, right, and then, transformation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Great.
But it's like, yeah, room to grow, room to grow, and so little steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just gonna say, I notice it every Sunday when I drive down Summit Avenue, because several churches down the way, got big flags, welcoming. Oh, this church, but there's nothing here.
Yeah.
So I'm always aware of that.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. I live in South Minneapolis as I was driving over today. I was both thinking not just about sort of explicit symbols of welcome, but also just how many churches there are and how many people need resources. And how many of these churches on this Wednesday evening are sitting, not this one, but most of them are sitting empty, right? Or maybe have a couple of groups happening or whatever, but very little community engagement is happening in these giant spaces with so many resources going into keeping those spaces upright and with the roof on, right? And yet sitting empty so often. So yeah, I'm with you. Other thoughts before we move on? This is juicy stuff. Yeah.
my recently, just keeping an ear tuned to this, is just, I think this reminds me of how white people don't experience racism
Mm.
when other people can see it very clearly
Mm.
because we're swimming in it. And I feel like that is true here at this church, is that the feedback that we've gotten is very specific and clear from people from gender expansive, LGBTQ, about our welcoming, about the things they do and don't see. That it's like, it just keeps flying over the heads, so.
Yeah, and I wonder too about, because Unitarian Universalism in and of itself is well known for being a very welcoming denomination and religious tradition, that if there's some kind of resting on laurels about that, right? Of like, well, we're you. Like, of course it's a welcoming place. But if you don't have any kind of context, right? If you've never heard of Unitarian Universalism before, don't know any of the history or the cultural context, that's not a signal to you, right? It would be to me, because I understand, like, oh, that's a UU church, that's a place that I know that I could go. That's not necessarily true to the general audience, right?
Not to be a sociologist about it,
Please.
but I also feel like, or he could snag a rainbow on the door outside of the building, but the congregation is ready to live it.
That's right. And that's what we're gonna talk about.
Rainbow flag out there. They walk in, people are delivering funny and screwing their pronouns.
That's right, that's right.
Or presumptive assumptions about like,
That's right, that's right. And that's, yes, a lot of what we're gonna talk about tonight is making. So that's the direction we're headed, for sure. So, one more little pre-reflection question, just with the large group. I wonder if we can kind of name what voices or experiences are not reflected. Who's not here with us in this conversation? We can kind of look in the shadows for a second. Off the top of my head, I don't see any ministers in the room.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
No people.
Younger folks, sure.
No people.
No Wi-Fi.
Yep, no, I don't see any people of color, invisible people of color, perhaps white passing.
I'm gonna be 46 next month, but I think I'll be under something.
Yeah.
Totally.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. But everybody's on this track to test. Yeah, absolutely. I don't see visible signs of poverty. I don't presume to know any of your financial situations, but
I don't know.
sure, yeah. Great. I wonder if we can reflect together for a second about how that might influence our conversation and the direction our conversation goes. It's okay if there's not kind of verbal answers to that question, but if we can kind of just hold the question together for a second, how does this kind of limit what we're able to do, and to start imagining together about how to amplify the people in the room and get more people into. There's also pieces of this that are culturally informed, right? Unitarian Universalism is known to be a predominantly white upper middle class tradition, right? Historically and contemporary, right? So there's pieces of this that aren't necessarily ours alone to fix, right? But still worth noting. All right, so for the next little bit of time, I'm gonna do a lot of talking at you. I apologize for that, but we will come back together into conversation. Feel free as slides come up, if you're like, ooh, I wanna be able to see that again later, I can always send you the slide deck too. If you wanna take pictures, that's totally cool with me.
I have
Oh, great, Susie's got some copies for you as well. So feel free, make yourself comfy. I'm just gonna lecture for a bit, and also don't feel like you need to read all, some of them have a lot of words on them, so don't feel like you need to read them verbatim. We begin in the year 2023. The Trans Refuge Bill is signed into law here in Minnesota. So this was highly anticipated by many lawmakers and the community organizers here. Was one of the very first of its kind declaring this state a sanctuary state for trans folks. This was also before Trump's second election. But also in the context of a huge surge of anti-trans legislation happening, especially in nearby states, right? Dakotas in particular, Wisconsin's got some of its own problems going on. Also, slightly distant areas like Nebraska, Montana, right? A couple degrees, couple states of separation away from us. So with this passed, and trans organizers and trans folks living in Minnesota and the Twin Cities said, yay! And then we said, uh-oh, what are we gonna do with all these people when they get here? This is inevitably going to signal safe harbor, and we anticipate a huge influx of people coming here. But already we're in these situations of low housing, low employment, high poverty rates, high homelessness rates, especially with trans folks. What are we gonna do with all these people? And as I said, this was also, again, before the second Trump administration began. So a whole new onslaught of concern came with that, right? And I also wanna say that trans refuge in Minnesota, well, this is sort of a landmark thing that we think of as this 2023 bill. The trans refuge in Minnesota is actually a much longer story. We can think about things like the University of Minnesota was the second place in the US to provide gender reassignment surgeries, starting in 1966, just followed by Johns Hopkins and only by a couple of months. So really are pioneers in the field. It wasn't without its problems. They only accepted people who were assigned male at birth. They didn't accept anyone who had a criminal record for anything other than cross-dressing, which was still illegal in most cities and states until the 80s, if not later. And they didn't accept folks who engaged in sex work, right? So it limited actually the pool pretty significantly. However, they offered free care to anyone who was able to get themselves to Minnesota to receive that care. So we see already immigration patterns of trans folks coming, especially to the Twin Cities, as early as the mid-60s, right? In 1975, the city of Minneapolis had a landmark ordinance, their anti-discrimination ordinance, which was largely informed by the surge of gay and lesbian activists in the Twin Cities at that time. This was a landmark ordinance in that it was the first of its kind to specifically enumerate in its own 70s language trans people. Specifically, I think I wrote it down here, said having a self-image or identity not traditionally associated with one's biological maleness or feelings was how it was enumerated in the ordinance, and yet this was the first of its kind. There had never been any kind of legal protections of this kind attributed to it before. And then the Minnesota Human Rights Act in 1993, well known as being one of the very first comprehensive discrimination acts. This covers schools, it covers any kind of federally managed, regulated environments like prisons, state land grant universities, and provides essentially a safeguard against a number of different attempts at discrimination. Now, these laws and policies are awesome, and they signal, like this trans refuge bill as well, signal protection, signal safe harbor, and yet they don't necessarily provide the material and cultural resources necessary for all of the people coming to those places seeking that safe harbor, right? Trans women of color in Minnesota are still especially experiencing high rates of violence, criminalization, employment, moving in and out of the system, etc. 1 in 3 trans folks in Minnesota live below the poverty line. 1 in 3 folks have experienced homelessness or housing security. That's a big, big number, right? Especially considering that the trans population is something like 2% of the population, right? Of course, also not to mention higher rates of harassment and violence from anyone from employers to police to family members, etc. Now, theoretically, those ordinances I mentioned, the Minneapolis Anti-Discrimination Ordinance, the Minnesota Human Rights Act, protect against discrimination in these environments, but don't necessarily do the cultural education work for the people that work in those environments or that are responsible for actually providing services and interacting with these people, right? And homeless folks homeless trans folks, but homeless folks at large, but especially trans folks, are statistically more likely in Minnesota to sleep outside of shelters because of fear of discrimination and harassment and happens within shelter settings, and also because shelter settings are typically gendered, right? You typically have a men's and a women's sort of housing in shelters, and often when trans folks arrive to shelters, they say, we don't really know where to put you, and then often that can lead to, if not discomfort, then probably violence, right? Now, currently, there are 7 anti-trans executive orders on the federal level, starting with that one that he pulled out, but the day he was inaugurated, it's just impressive. And 40 states with anti-trans bills or executive orders either in process or currently passed, right? ACLU is tracking 616 anti-LGBTQ bills in the US, and there are 19 in Minnesota, this place that is a trans refuge state. So we have a crisis on our hands. We have this huge influx of scared, traumatized, vulnerable people escaping prejudice and harm and violence in their home states, coming to a place that's not to welcome them. We don't have the tools, the infrastructure, the homes, and of course we have the resources exist, right? It's all about the distribution of the resources. There's more than enough for all of us. And yet what is liquid, what is accessible, is not enough. And now as we see the passport policy is being upheld, right, in the last week or so, we've seen that whatever nonsense is going on with the passports is staying, which is gonna make international travel and immigration a lot more difficult. We're gonna see expatriation, which many folks have been sort of banking on, becoming more and more difficult to do, right? There's inevitably more to come. Any day that anyone wakes up and we look at our headlines, something new might happen, right? Recently, I was looking and saw a headline, right, that said, FBI to categorize trans people as violent, nihilistic hate group, right? They're pulling it out from all sides, right? So I'm gonna kind of quickly go through this, but I wanna kind of also give you some historical context for refuge and asylum seekers internationally in Minnesota as well, because we have a deep and relevant history. So it goes as far back as the 1850s with railroad companies that were headquartered in St. Paul, aggressively recruiting, especially folks in Germany and Norway, promising abundance and land and wealth coming to the land of opportunity that is Minnesota, USA. Many folks, especially from Norway, would end up returning to Norway after experiencing significant discrimination here after they'd arrived. Through World War II in the 30s and 40s, Jewish refugee families arrived largely to sponsorships and programs through local synagogues. Hubert Humphrey, during his time in Congress, as a senator, it increased refugee support or increased pressure to amplify refugee support, which would lead to the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which essentially eliminated barriers and made it so that theoretically, right, anybody from any country is free to immigrate to the US, which was not the case before that. Minnesota has one of the largest Korean adoptee populations due to Cold War child sponsorships. Hmong, Lao, Vietnamese, Cambodian resettlements in the 1970s would eventually make the Twin Cities a Hmong cultural epicenter, especially due to high volumes of Hmong cultural organizations. Right? Somali resettlement in after the 1991 Civil War. You may know the Cedar Riverside neighborhood is sometimes called Little Mogadishu. Right? It has one of the largest, or the largest actually, Somali population outside of Somalia. Karen and Karen asylum seekers fleeing Myanmar came in the 90s, in part because of the influx of Hmong refugees here. So there was some infrastructure that was culturally competent for Southeast Asian immigrants. And then between Civil War legacies, results of NAFTA kind of pushing out small farmers from Mexico and South and Central America, we saw the population of folks from these countries triple between 1990 and 2000, and then almost double again between 2000 and 2010. So all of this is to say there is immense infrastructure actually for how and why we support resettlers and asylum seekers here in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities. And congregations have been at the forefront of this work from the very beginning. Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, Minnesota Council of Churches are actually known as sort of models, and their work and their research is used sort of throughout the country in doing this work. And yet, again, even with all of these histories, these influxes of refugees and asylum seekers, we see disproportionately higher rates of poverty, of housing insecurity, of incarceration, of violence, of unemployment. I say here, 46% of Somali refugees and immigrants live below the poverty line, right? Yet we have the largest population of Somali folks outside of Somalia. So these are the circumstances of welcome, right, in which we are faced, right? We can open the doors and we can open them wide and we can hold them open. It's all about, are we ready for them once they actually arrive? Can we actually provide the resources and supports necessary to offer quality of life? And I just, this is kind of a one-liner that I come back to a lot, but this tells us, right, there's existing patterns and ways that this work has worked in the past and continues to work. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to put a little air in it, right? All right, so this is the part where I'm going to kind of walk you through what I call paradigm shifts, right? We're going to talk about kind of especially where in the congregations that I often work with or interact with, where I kind of see them often being and kind of moving toward where we could go. So often in congregations, I would say your average liberal progressive congregation that has a trans flag on their website, right, will not necessarily have done the sort of background contextual educational work before slapping that sticker up on their website, right? Signage and outward signaling is great and important, and of course, as we were talking about before, gives people who don't have any other cultural context for the environment a clear symbol that they can follow, right? And yet, just like we don't make a room into a sanctuary by just lighting a candle, right? We can't create a sanctuary just by saying it is so, right? It requires more than that. So then there's demonstrated welcome. Well, we can demonstrate welcome through on educational opportunities, approaching cultural competence, cultural humility too, being sort of I don't necessarily know everything, but I'm willing to learn more. Sharing our space and resources. I hear already, housing mixed, one voice mixed forests, having transforming families meetings here, right? You're already doing some of this work. And also making space for vulnerability and mutual storytelling, I think, especially when it comes to trans liberation work, remembering that trans folks have gender stories, and so does everybody else. We all have gender stories. Our genders were all formed in the fires of family, genetics, biology, environment, culture, et cetera. We all have become with the same tools, right? And also, of course, having sort of visible trans representation and leadership, all are deeply meaningful. But at the end of the day, are we experiencing them? The experience of welcome is really trusting that you can enter a space, having all the information you need to enter a space and know that you have little to no fear of harm. Also seeing your identity and your experience reflected and represented, whether it's in programs, whether it's in worship, whether it's in religious education programming, whatever, every kind of corner of the organization. This belongingness process I offer here, I've pulled this from the Springtide Research Institute, which is an organization that primarily does research around young people and congregational life. So this comes from research around people between 16 and 24, but I think it's deeply relevant to all of us, that sort of the first phase of belonging is I'm noticed. Someone saw me come in, they made eye contact, they smiled, they shook my hand, that I've been recognized, right? And I think also on a deeper level that my identity or my experience is, right? Level 2 being named. My experience or my identity is being specifically named that it's being, right? And then the third being I'm known. Not only is my identity and experience present and recognized, but it's also valued and integrated and mutually understood. Another, the Springtide also offers this sort of tenets of belonging that I think are really valuable, which is welcome being kind of the first of them, and warmth, supportiveness, authenticity, vulnerability, honesty, curiosity, invitation, openness, accountability. All these are things I also heard many of you reflect in that question earlier, right? I want to note of my own intrigue that understanding is not on this list, right? Because you don't actually need to understand someone to enable their development in space, right? Love exists without understanding all the time. And something that I really try to encourage individuals and organizations away from is that sort of the conquest of understanding is the path toward this one, right? I'm never going to fully understand any single one of you or any experience you've ever had, right? I think it's a sort of an unreasonable goal or an unreasonable expectation that we need to deepen our understanding or wrap our heads around it, right? When really all of this work is more about wrapping our hearts around it and also wrapping our resources around it, right? It's not to say that it's not worth thinking about. It's not to say it's not worth continuing to explore and deepen your understanding. But I do find that when we fixate on that people kind of get stuck, their wheels get stuck in the mud, right? Because you're never actually going to get where you think you need to go. And then it also kind of becomes a self-created barrier, right? Then you feel like, well, I'm never going to go into this one because you're never going to have that sort of entire understanding. And, I've got news for you that not even trans people can tell you exactly why or how they became who they are, right? I can't tell you why I'm a man. I just am. I just know I am. There's a certain degree of unknowability to trans. That makes people uncomfortable, including trans people, right? We want to be able to put our finger on it and say why this is the way this is. And how often are we actually kind of wasting our time and our resources on those questions when they're not actually leading us to the point, right? Ultimately, the only people who can actually tell us if the space is welcoming are the people who feel welcomed in that space. The only people who can actually say this is a welcoming environment are trans people who feel welcomed here, right? So we can, of course, do our best. We can use the information we have, we can build relationships, we can do all the things, and we'll go more into some concrete suggestions to development. But generally speaking, it's not the role of anybody other than the folks experiencing welcome to name that welcome exists here, right? Which is also a tough pill to swallow because you want to be able to say, I know for sure that my congregation is a welcoming place. And this is true in other corners too, right? And think about only our children can tell us if we're good parents, right? Any opportunity that we have to kind of think about if we're doing it right or doing it good is really about how the people we're serving are experiencing. Another little paradigm shift I want to walk you through is kind of inclusion versus. So inclusion is the language we really hear most often in this way, right? We want our congregation to be inclusive of trans people. And that's a super important and necessary first step for most congregations, right? Because most of us are doing a lot of unlearning, right? We're having to undo a lot of cultural norms and barriers that we've created, right? Or that our ancestors, our forebears have created, right? And inclusion, when I hear inclusion, what I hear is we made you a seat at this table. Come on in and join us, right? What solidarity is this sort of shared risk, right? That it's not about we made you a seat at the table, it's that this table is yours. It's always been yours, it always will be yours. Being willing to sort of concede some power and share some risk, bear some risk. And I think of solidarity as a spiritual practice, of really embodying our values and being willing to put our bodies into the positions of bearing risk and conceding power, right? All food for thought. All right, here's the juice. Need one first. So, I'll also say, I'll sort of preface this with, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a transplant or refugee, right? I'm not a systems change expert. Like these are not the capacities that I'm a community minister, I'm a theologian, I'm a trans person who lives in this community, I'm a community organizer. So as I work through these kind of types of welcome, these are from my experience and my education and my framework. And if you talked to a social worker or someone who's a systems change expert, they might tell you there's 4 more kinds of support that I didn't know, right? But as far as my vantage point, this is what I have to share. So the first being kind of infrastructural support, right? Thinking about what are the barriers to housing, to employment, to healthcare in really concrete ways. And being able to use your position of power, your clout, your privilege, whether it's your position of employment, your position as a property owner, these really like concrete kind of clout areas to create or to eliminate some of those barriers. So that could look like renting or purchasing homes, opening shelters, creating jobs and services, training care providers, right? All of this is very meaningful, all of it's very important, and none of it happens in a vacuum, and none of it happens with a single individual or even a single congregation, right? This takes intentional, thoughtful collaboration between many community partners in order to enact really big picture projects. This isn't to say that this is not worth our attention, right? But it is to say that this requires other work in order to kind of get to this, right? The next is direct support. And we're gonna kind of hang out on this one for a little bit, because as I understand, in sort of the Welcoming Community or Welcoming Coalition, Welcoming Village Coalition, and a little bit about what Susie kind of shared about your congregation and where you're at, but there are folks in this congregation who have homes and who have spaces who they feel like, I'm ready, like let's get some people who need housing into my house and we'll get it good and it'll be great, right? And so I want to hang out with this for a little bit, because all of that's wonderful and so important. And also, let's think through what some of these barriers are. Why aren't there just people in our houses, right? And part of that is that housing people in your home shouldn't be taken lightly. It should be done at what I would call the speed of trust, right? There are so many considerations when you're bringing a stranger into your home that are worth really taking the time with. One is that especially trans folks seeking refuge are inevitably experiencing acute trauma. They are escaping their home. They are completely uprooting their lives. And with that inevitably comes emotional distress, mental health concerns, right? There are a number of circumstances that we may not actually be ready or prepared to handle once they're actually in our living room, right? Also cultural considerations like distinctions in class and race and ethnicity, those kinds of competence pieces, right? That we may feel like, well, I'm a nice person, isn't that enough? But I was sharing with Susie earlier, there's this documentary that I was not able to track down, but I'm gonna keep working on it. But and we'll talk a little bit more about the host home program, is a program here in the Twin Cities. But one of the things that, there's this small documentary about the program where they profile a family that took in a young queer person. I think he's 18 or 19 years old. And they are a affluent white family that lives in South Minneapolis. They're homeowners, and they bring in, a young Black gay man from North Minneapolis, right? And one of the challenges that they encounter is that he doesn't want to eat any of their food, right? Because he said, none of this is familiar to me. I don't know what quinoa is, right? I don't know what kale is. This doesn't feel like home to me. This isn't my food, right? And so that part of this documentary is they have sort of an active conversation about like, how can we integrate some more of your kind of like cultural reference points into our life, right? How can we kind of merge our lives together in this way? And so having the tools and the space necessary to do some of that reflection work requires also relationships with people who can help you facilitate those conversations, right? There's kind of more background that needs to be done in that way. And bottom line, really having thoughtfulness and boundaries about what your support role is in this person's life. Are you just the person who owns the house that they're sleeping in? If so, you have to really be able to work through the boundaries. Right? I'm not your social worker. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your mom. I'm not your, right? Being able to really draw those lines in loving ways, of course, being really like setting boundaries is never about distancing ourselves from people. It's actually about bringing ourselves closer to people, right? By naming exactly what we're able and willing to do. Because ultimately, if you're not moving at the speed of trust, which is so critical for everyone's safety, because the risk of harm goes both ways as well, right? Desperate people do desperate things. People who are experiencing acute trauma are likely to do things they wouldn't do otherwise, right? So having this sort of continued contextual learning that really is unending, and having the tools necessary to really take the time with all of this is critical. So the program I was talking about a minute ago, called Connect Post-Home Program, it used to just be called the GLBC Post-Home Program, and it's through Avenues for Youth. So they work specifically with queer and trans youth ages 16 to 24. They opened in 1997. So they've been doing this work successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully for the last almost 30 years, right? Now, this program requires 16 hours of preliminary training, multiple interviews, home visits, goal plans, ongoing training. It's also an opt-in for the young people. They have to decide that they want to stay there in order to be placed there. It's not a foster care system. They're not just put there because that's the space that's available, right? If they don't think it's a good fit, if they don't think they're gonna mesh well with the people there, it's a no-go and they look for it, right? Avenues also offers the wraparound services. They offer mental health care, they offer primary health care, they offer social support, right? They offer all of these other things that without that agency kind of as the intermediary of work, the people inevitably hosting are sort of responsible for finding whether they want to be or not, right? They're the only, trusting relationship that this person may have, right? And I'll say that, the Connect program is not only age limited, so it doesn't necessarily, if you're 25, no go, right? And it's also capacity limited. It's limited to how many hosts they have trained and ready. So it doesn't necessarily meet, as I was thinking of this, I was like, why aren't they just doing all this, right? But of course, it's because they can only do what they have the tools and capacity to do. All right, you've heard me talk enough. Let's watch a couple of videos. Actually, I think we'll watch, for the sake of time, we'll watch just this one video, and we'll continue.
Statistics are staggering. LGBTQ youth are more than twice as likely to experience homelessness, according to researchers at the University of Chicago. But I recently talked with one Minnesota organization that is taking on that trend, one relationship at a time.
I still have to figure out the list and all the updated addresses, so that's been a barrier.
A holiday tradition.
Why don't you just crunch them all?
Celebrating families.
All right, we're getting there.
May resonate a bit more with Katie Leverance and Archie Ramey. After all,
I was kind of stuck.
This card captures a chosen family.
I've given him one and I have one at work. I haven't sent him out yet though.
Found after years of struggle.
We ended up, me and my siblings, going back home and then being put back in the system within 7 months. It wasn't a safe environment for me and my younger siblings.
But the now 20-year-old Archie took action then to find a safe haven for his siblings and finally himself.
I guess I didn't let myself win this time. I let myself have something good.
Let himself have something good as his true self, affirmed by Katie and her husband Tim.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to find you guys and just be immediately accepted, because even if I changed my pronouns or the way I wanted to be viewed, you guys never questioned it. It was just okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We got it.
Mm-hmm. Seems like such a basic thing, just to accept you the way you were at that time, and you've changed a lot since then, but giving you the space and freedom to explore who you were without any shame or judgment, I think was huge.
That's all I needed. That's all I needed for years.
It's all a lot of youth may need.
These are untold stories. They are invisible stories.
But can't always find.
Roughly 40% of all youth experiencing housing instability and homelessness are LGBTQ identified, but make up about 8% of the general population.
At the program manager of Connect, one part of the Avenues for Youth organization, Ryan Berg has long witnessed the real struggles of LGBTQ youth.
Folks were recognizing that youth that were in shelter that were LGBTQ identified were reporting they'd rather sleep on the streets than utilize those shelters due to discrimination, harassment, and violence.
So Connect offers an alternative, allowing youth ages 16 to 24 to choose their own potential host. people who offer shelter, food, affirmation for an average of 1 year, while the program provides other services. And the need for that support has only grown, Ryan says, in today's climate.
Because of the political and cultural assaults on LGBTQI youth, particularly trans and non-binary youth across the country, youth are turning to Minnesota because Minnesota is a trans refuge state. A lot of youth coming from Texas and Florida and Missouri and Iowa and South Dakota wanting resources and support. So we do need more hosts to meet that need.
And while hosts may offer a safe haven,
We were excited to hear someone might want to live with us.
they also receive family.
Just being kind and welcoming to him meant so much. And then he was willing to trust us with more about himself. Archie was and is the coolest person ever. He's such a fantastic artist and writer. We're just so continually blessed to have him in our lives.
A life of connection.
I called him Little Bird and he calls me Mama Bird. He drew this and we got our tattoos about 3 months ago now.
Yeah.
One that can hardly be confined to a card.
Silly dog.
For a family who waited, fought for, and finally found each other.
We've been telling people that he's our son because he called us his parents about a month ago. That even made it feel more real than getting tattoos together.
Everyone deserves to have a family.
Now I just gotta get addresses on them.
Yep.
Love you.
I love you too.
Connect works with 10 youth at a time. It is small by design, and they have a perfect track record. 100% of the young people who've gone through the program have eventually moved into stable housing. To learn more about this option for youth or the opportunity to host or support this program in other ways, just go to our website, care11.com.
Something I really love about Archie's kind of reflection here is Archie's coming out of a situation in which he had really limited choices, right? And found himself in a situation where he not only had to choose to live with these people, right? He opted into living with them, but now is liberated by the freedom of choice that he's afforded by. I think a lot about how do we inject opportunities for choice and autonomy into populations who are otherwise without choice and autonomy, but that lack of choice is actually their situation. So I want to kind of cruise through this because I do want to have a little bit of time for kind of Q&A and reflection at the end here. I'm going to skip this one here. Skip. There we go. In the meantime, as you're, there's not necessarily a sort of standardized training, right? Connect has their own training program, and something that in my position as an organizer that I'm really passionate about is thinking about how to use our existing community relationships to try to build out some kind of standardized training for hosting folks who are seeking refuge in the Twin Cities. In the meantime, I really encourage you to continue building relationships and investing your resources in existing programs, which I hear you doing with things like hosting Transforming Families meetings, having the sort of aforementioned initiatives, right? And when I say resources, of course, I mean money, space, time, supplies, people power, not just money, although money itself is deeply important. But there are so many resources contained within our congregation that are shareable and useful, right? One thing I think about too is fiscal sponsorships. There are many kind of small startup community projects and organizations that often will have an opportunity to receive grant funding. We can't receive it without a fiscal sponsor that's able to kind of back them. Churches are really well positioned to do that because often Church-Unity is an established 501c3, right? So you have the ability to kind of be the bearer of those grants. First Universalist, this is something that they've done for a number of organizations as well. And I encourage you, if you're one of these people who's like, I got a place, I'm ready, consider going on the Connect's website and exploring what it would look like to be trained in their program. Also because that will help with knowledge sharing within our own network, right? Is if we have more people who kind of go through their training and have the opportunity to get some of their resources, we're able to kind of figure out what that could look like on a larger scale. So the last of these, of course, being community support, right? Some of this is what you're already doing. I also hear that sort of rebuilding community trust is a piece of what you're wanting and needing to do at this time in your church's life. This looks like building intentional relationships with community leaders. Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you. You're doing it. And partnering organizations as well. I can't encourage you enough to not wait for us to come to you. to, as representatives of this organization, be visible representatives of this organization and go to events being hosted by trans-led organizations in the Twin Cities. There's a resource handout that you'll have as you leave, and I encourage you, like, if you're on social media, follow these organizations on social media, pay attention to if they have fundraisers or community events that you have an opportunity to, go up to the table, talk to the people at the table, learn about volunteer opportunities that they have, find pathways to deepening relationships with existing projects that need resources, need funding, need people power, right? And then of course there's other what I think of as kind of low-hanging fruit, but you might not think of it as low-hanging fruit, but hosting and promoting and sponsoring events, right? And when I say sponsoring publicly, right? In doing this kind of solidarity work of bearing the risk of, okay, we put our name on this thing and we put a trans pride flag on this thing and we're putting it up in coffee shops, and whoever comes in the door is who came in the door. Now that also means having some degree of preparedness, right? For anything can happen at any time. That's also true every Sunday in your congregation, right? The doors aren't password protected, right? Engaging queer and trans leadership in worship on staff, having trans folks in the pulpit, right? And advertising those opportunities to the larger public. Talking with folks who run your RV programs about how trans and gender issues are talked about with all ages, right? There are trans people of all ages. There are also people of all ages have trans people in their lives, right? I have a 3-year-old niece, an 8-year-old nephew, a 12-year-old niece, and they all have a trans person in their family, right? Okay, and of course I want to say each of these 3 kind of categories of support is necessary. Every one of them is necessary. We can't do the work of welcoming without all 3. The work of sort of comprehensive welcoming. And also, no one of these pieces is any one person or one congregation's responsibility, right? I don't want you to look at these things and think, wow, we have so much to do, I don't know where to start. That's the opposite of where I want you to be, right? I want you to feel like you have some opportunity to grab a hold of this, right? It all feels very urgent because these people are coming and they're here and they're sleeping in their cars outside right now, right? All of that is the truth of the matter. And also we have to move at the speed of trust, lest no welcome or support actually happen, right? If we move faster than we have the resources to do so, the energy and the resources are spent for naught, right? Okay, so much talking. I would love to kind of, let's marry together kind of Q&A and reflection. So I would love to hear back from you. What did you not know, or yeah, what did you not know 2 hours ago, an hour ago, whatever, before we started, that you know now? And what ideas do you have kind of from all of this about some next steps that you as a team or as a congregation could take? And or any questions?
One, I didn't know about the Connect program.
Sure.
I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
This was really helpful to get that fleshed
Yeah,
out
right.
and get some understanding.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great program.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And you know, there are people who went through that program as young people who now are community organizers in the Twin Cities, right? And have stayed here and have developed lives here, and it's just really meaningful, for sure.
I'm really impressed with this too.
Yeah.
I used to work for a nonprofit that, among other things, was all harm reduction based.
Mhm.
And one of the many things the organization did was a site called Youth on Fire,
Mm.
which was a drop-in day center for homeless runaway street involved youth. And yeah, like way more than half of those kids, age I think between 16 to 22, maybe 20, I think 22 though, were LGBTQ, not welcome in their own homes, which is awful. So I'm really familiar with the issue, and I know I think that's happening here. And I'm kind of looking ahead to that my home is not full of screaming nerd children. And thinking like, that's the thing I can totally do down the line when
Absolutely.
my home is a calm place that would be a refuge.
Yeah.
As opposed to like sensory hell.
Yeah, totally. For sure, for sure. I think that's a really good example too of like, just because you have the space doesn't mean the space is welcoming, right? Of your own volition, you're like, I got screamers, nobody wants to be there. Yeah,
It's something.
that's right, that's right, yeah.
You know, I think for me, what I took away from today that surprised me, is when you said we don't need to understand. That really hit home for me, because when we were talking earlier about where we put ourselves on the scale, and I gave myself a low number, and these guys said, oh, I think you're being too low, but I think it's because I'm wanting to understand. That's the engineer part of it,
Sure,
you know, and
I think it's natural, yeah.
right, and just to love, like you said, just accept and love, and so that's the biggest thing I'm taking away
That's
from
great.
it.
That's great, thank you.
I was very unaware of how Minnesota has been on the forefront of this movement. I didn't know that we did this first, and it's been going on since 1966.
Yeah. I think it helps to kind of also understand that, you know, the influx of trans folks coming now is not new, and also that there is a large and deeply established community of trans folks here already, right? And that we're so blessed to have trans elders, which, you know, the life expectancy of a trans person is 34, right? So to have folks who have managed to settle their lives here since the 60s, who are now in their 70s, right, is kind of monumental, right? Not necessarily true in other parts of the country.
You just say, the people going a little bit more about that short life expectancy that you just mentioned.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, you know, with all of these sort of compounding realities of housing insecurity, healthcare access, et cetera, on top of astronomically high suicide rates, on top of astronomically high violence and murder rates, right? And that particularly the reason for that 34 number is largely due to violence against Black trans women, right? Who experience the highest likelihoods of all of these other realities as well. You know, Trans Day of Remembrance is an annual celebration and observance of trans folks who have been lost to violence, which has been recognized since 1988, I think was the first one. And every year, sort of in necrology, or a list of names of trans folks lost to violence is shared in rituals and vigils throughout the country. And I last weekend did a presentation with another congregation. So I had a chance to kind of look up that the list this year has 383 names on it, right? And of course that is also a global number, and also it's very high with consideration of how small the population actually is, despite what the headlines would tell you, right? So there's a lot of, it's not a singular reason, right? It's not just because of violence against trans people, although that's a significant factor, and also kind of depends on your definition of violence against trans people, right? Because housing insecurity is also violence against trans people. Suicide is the internalization of violence against trans people, right? All of it kind of mirrors back together. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
I remember that question from the
Yeah.
very beginning.
Yeah.
19 bills in Minnesota, is that all state level or some of those town level, and how and who?
Yeah.
What level do I need to be calling?
Yeah. Another thing I'm not is a policy expert, but I will say, yes, they are all on the state level, on the floor. A large number of them are sports related, or about banning trans folks from sports, school sports. There's a couple of drag bans on the floor. There's a couple of attempting to redefine sex on the state level in the same way it's been sort of redefined on the federal level.
Are any of them in danger of passing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And again, I would be the last person to ask about policy specific kinds of facts and figures, but yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity. I think we often lose sight as people in the Twin Cities, right? We're in such a deeply blue area that most of the state is red, and that the reason that we tend to swing blue so often is because of this metro area and Little Duluth and Little Mankato, right?
That's me flying up there.
That's right. Yeah, but there's a lot of deep dark red encircling us, and you don't have to go that far, right? The Blaine School District has been dealing with trans harassment and attempting to ban talking about queer and trans people in their classrooms and Anoka schools and Coon Rapids schools, and right, you don't have to go that far out of the city to find antagonism, right? And you can also find it in the city, to be clear. Yeah.
And someone mentioned that the Transparent Families presentation last week, that there was this group of school board members that are actually lobbying, in the state of Minnesota, actually lobbying against trans kids in sports, in school sports.
Yeah. Isn't that silly? Yeah. Isn't that silly? And from my vantage point, I'm like, why are you making me care about this? Like, it is such a silly thing to have to invest energy into like children's sports. That's what we're building policy about? Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Yeah, other questions, ideas? Yeah.
I remember reading a couple of articles about when the Supreme Court decided for same-sex marriage, marriage equality, that a lot of the anti-trans stuff came as retaliation by the right.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, we're not giving up. What can we do? Who can we oppress? Who won't have maybe the popular support that queer folks have found. I'm just curious if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of eye-opening when I saw it, like, this is an actual strategy and a ramping up of this hatred, not just more of the same.
And an old one too, right? I mean, this is an often used playbook by the Christian right. So, when they couldn't run on segregation anymore, they started running on abortion. When they couldn't run on abortion anymore, they started running on gay marriage. Couldn't run on gay marriage, right? It's always about the morality vote, right? And how can we kind of manipulate our morality vote into getting afraid of a new group of people or a new, community practice or whatever it might be, right? This year or this decade, whatever it might be, is all about trans folks. And yeah, I think you can see the exact same policies and procedures reflected deep down throughout history. And I think that when we know that and when we're aware of that, for me anyway, I think it on the one hand, you could feel kind of daunted by that. Like, oh, they're just gonna keep doing this, huh? Like after this one, they're just gonna find a new group of people to bully. And also for me, it makes me feel empowered because, oh, I know your game now. I know exactly what you're on about. And it makes it a little bit easier to plan your moves because you know what their moves are, right? Unfortunately, their moves are really exciting or invigorating. I don't know. They're appealing to a number of people, largely because of cultural obligation, right? Folks who are sort of, registered red till they're dead, right? There's just like an ability to kind of manipulate those people to run on a bully vote.
Well, we're at time, so I just wanted to say two things. One is the resource list of resources that Seth put together is out there in hard copy. You could also get emailed to you a copy where the links all go. Or you can take the hard copy and make your own links. But so there's that out there, and I have a couple of hard copies here of this very informative program. I'm happy to have someone take them if you use, and then I have more copies that I could easily send you if you want to, again, put your name on the email list for any of those things. And there were two terrific other programs that were put online, and maybe you saw about them before, because there was a little bit of press in the Unity newsletter. One is defending trans lives, and the other is responding to the anti-trans movement. Some of the topics we just touched on at the end. Through Moose Job is where we got access to these programs, and Seth also can help us get access to things to watch at home. You don't have to go to a meeting, comfort of your own home. But I saw some of these programs and then they were really top flight presenters and informative, and I really appreciated it. So I would say mostly thank you though for tonight, but thank you
put a lot of stuff out there and now we've gotta
I'm so glad.
figure out where to go.
I'm so glad. And this final slide is of course in the slide deck here, but offers, you know, some of the suggestions that I lifted up here of just kind of next steps for you to take. Also out on the table, my email address is on a piece of paper if you feel like you'd like to, if you have questions you'd like to ask privately, that's a great way to do that. You can also feel free to add me on Facebook or Instagram if you're on social media. I also post other places that I'm preaching or giving workshops typically on social media if you'd like to come here and speak somewhere else.